Welcome to Sounds of Brass.
All in a Day's Work, 30 Years as a Local Bobby, by Chris Helme.
Chapter 2. Come back when you're 19, lad. We'll take anybody then. In 1966, I started working at my first full-time job. This was in the accounts department at Calder Valley Transport in Wade Street, Halifax. For someone who was pretty hopeless at maths, it seemed ironic that I found myself in such a department. Working alongside a man who had worked in a railway accounts department for 30 years before coming to Calder Valley was a real eye-opener. I sat, mesmerised, watching him run his finger down 3 columns of pounds, shillings and pence figures, and adding them all up simultaneously with not an adding machine in sight. I also found myself working on an old-fashioned switchboard, one of those where you pushed a plug in and pulled another one out. This was in addition to making the tea and going to Cockcroft Man's bread shop in the town centre every morning. After a couple of months I was moved into the transport office, working alongside people who were much older. They taught me many aspects of the work, but most of all they taught me how to deal with people both on the telephone and in person. I realised later that this was an introduction to discovering and learning people skills, something that would become invaluable in later years. These people skills were more advanced than those from doing paper rounds during my school years or working at Brooks's. After a couple of months had gone by, I was still determined to join the police, so it was time to go to Brighouse Police Station to see about signing up. The Bradford Road Police Station had only opened in 1964, replacing the old one in Police Street. This was a police station that had been built almost a century earlier to replace an old lock-up in Ganny Road. Not long after the police station was demolished, the street was renamed Lawson Road. A sergeant invited me into a small office, a room I would get to know well in another 10 years' time. He started by saying, "So you want to join the police, lad?" "Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. I'm a sergeant." "What's your name, lad? Where do you live?" "Christopher Helme, sir." "Sorry, sergeant." "And I live in Stony Lane Estate." "Oh, that estate. Do we know you?" "No, sergeant." "Right, lad. How many O-levels have you got, then?" "None, sergeant. We didn't take them at our school." He put his pen down and said, "Well, that's it. You can't join without some O-levels." He obviously read the disappointment on my face and suggested that I came back when I was a year older. Joining at 16.5 years old would have meant joining the police cadets. That could have seen me potentially fly up the promotion ladder, right up to what I later call the Cloud 9 ranks. As I left the police station, I was determined that I would return, but for now it was back to Wade Street for at least another year. Having been in brass bands since that neighbour called to see me all those years earlier, I decided to have a go at joining the Royal Marines and hopefully getting a place at the Royal Marine School of Music in Deal, Kent. The date for my medical arrived, along with a train travel warrant to get me to a doctor's surgery somewhere in Manchester. After arriving at the doctor's rooms, it was down to business straight away. "Right, son, take your clothes off." "Everything, yes?" "OK, bend over." A quick examination followed. I can't imagine what he was looking for down there. "OK now, cough." Wow, I felt that. With that part of the medical over, he asked me to cover one eye and then read from a chart fastened up on the opposite side of the room. He then repeated the exercise with the other eye. No problems. Then it was crunch time, and memories of that next test came flooding back to me from my earlier experience at school. It was a colour test. I had to look at a book that had a series of dots on each page, and amongst the dots was a number. I later found out that this test was known as the Ishihara colour test, and it was the same one I had failed miserably at school. "Have you had one of these tests before?" the doctor asked. No, sir." "Well, I'm sorry, but you are colourblind, which means you are not acceptable and cannot join the Royal Marines." "I only want to join the band, sir." I said. "Music is black and white. There is no colour, you know." "Sorry, son," he replied, "but it will not do. In the Marines you have to be able to do everything, not just banding. You will not be able to fly aeroplanes either, or be an electrician. You might even have trouble being a snooker player. The problem there would be the brown and red ball in low light. 20 minutes, that's all it took to fail. I went back home and went back to working in Wade Street. It wasn't just office work at Calder Valley. Helping on house removals and moving grand pianos were just regular jobs when the house moving section was busy. We even had to empty the contents of a pub somewhere near Dewsbury, where 3 people had been shot and killed. When we arrived, the pub's best room was riddled with shotgun blast and had the appearance of an American speakeasy after some of Al Capone's men had paid a call. I was also involved in helping an old lady move her prepaid coffin into a garden shed at her new home. These were just some of the jobs that the office junior had to do back in those days. Another year had gone by when I started to get itchy feet again, and I thought it was time to revisit the police station at Brighouse. "Ah, it's you again." It was the same sergeant, and he escorted me back into the same small office. "Now, have you got any O-levels since we last met?" "No, but I've got a job, though," I replied. "Well, I'm sorry, but you still cannot join without O-levels. The best advice I can give you now, lad, is to come back when you are 19. We'll take anybody then." "Will I need O-levels then?" I asked, more in hope than anything else. "No O-levels, just an entrance exam to do." As I walked out of the police station, I realised that going back when I was 19 was my last chance. It was while working at Calder Valley that I became aware of something that all young people entering the world of work for the first time soon became very familiar with. This is the concept of tipping up. This meant that when you received your weekly brown wage packet with the gummed flap turned over and all the details of your week's wages set out on the front, you would go home with it and hand it over to your mother, unopened. Of course. I did try and convince my mother that one week I was mugged for 10 bob, but I don't think it worked. In any case, you can't get mugged every week. In return, I was given a few bob for bus fares and a brown carrier bag with my daily lunchtime snap ration. Joe Haley at Brooks's once asked me if my mother used to be a naffy cook, because there was always more than enough in my snap bag to feed an army. Calder Valley's annual office outing at Christmas time was always something to look forward to. One particular year, the boss took us all to somewhere called the Cavalier Club at Holsworth House in Halifax, because he knew the owners. I think he got a bit of a shock when he got the bill, which came to £106 for 10 people. But then it was the same place the Beatles had stayed a few years earlier, so it was, as we call it on Stony Lane Estate, a bit posh. I had to buy my first suit for the event. Thankfully, Calder Valley did work for Stand Evens, the Halifax-based worsted manufacturers, and I managed to buy a suit length for £3. I then had it made up for another £25. Very smart. I was still playing with Clifton and Lightcliffe, and I enjoyed those Christmas-time performances at all the big houses in Lightcliffe. It was one of the older band members who suggested that I might like to consider the Royal Signals Band at Catterick. Having failed the medical at the Royal Marines, I assumed the outcome would be just the same, but I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. With all the application forms completed, I had to attend the Royal Signals HQ at Catterick. I passed all the music exams, which was the easy bit. If I passed the medical in Bradford and the inevitable colour test, I was as good as in. The doctor's rooms were in a private house somewhere behind Chester Street bus station in Bradford. The doctor was in his collar-to-ankle white ice cream man-type smock, and he invited me into his surgery. Just as they did in Manchester, he told me to take all my clothes off. The examination was a repeat of what the Royal Marines doctor had done, but with the significant difference. "Have you ever had a colour eye test, Mr. Helme?" he asked. No, doctor." "Then let me explain what we will be doing. Better still, we'll have a practice before we do the real thing. Is that okay? Yes, that's fine, Doctor. The next part really had to be seen to be believed. Standing directly in front of me, he held up 3 coloured cards, about the size of beer mats. What colour is this card, Mr. Helme? Red. Correct. And the next? Blue. And the last one? Green. Well done. Now you have got the hang of it, we'll now do it for real. What colour is this card? Red. And the next? Blue. And the last one? Green. Well done, Mr. Helme. You have passed the colour test. I could have passed that with my eyes closed. What happens now? I asked. Having passed the music tests and now the medical, you'll be sent some papers to sign up. Sign up, I thought. You'll be joining the Royal Signals for between 3 and 9 years, he said. I thanked the doctor and left. No chance. I would not be signing up for that. I never joined the Royal Signals, but what a gift to have passed the daftest colour test I'd had so far. I hoped the police doctors would be just as daft. With my 19th birthday not far away, it was now time to look into joining the police for the 3rd and probably last time. In 1968 there had been significant changes in the local police service, with Halifax Borough Police becoming part of the new West Yorkshire Constabulary. This new force was formed under the Police Act of 1964, which merged the West Riding Constabulary with 6 borough forces: Barnsley, Dewsbury, Doncaster, Halifax, Huddersfield and Wakefield. The remaining 4 West Riding County boroughs, Bradford, Leeds, Sheffield and Rotherham, were retained as independent police forces, with the latter 2 merging to form a single force for Sheffield and Rotherham. The big decision for me was over which one I applied to join. West Yorkshire or Leeds City. I hadn't realised that the City of Bradford Police was still an independent force. Going back to Brighouse could be a problem, with it now being part of the new West Yorkshire Constabulary. Once they discovered I was single, I could have been posted anywhere in the county where they were short-staffed, and that could be miles away from Stony Lane. This would have been all well and good, except I had never been away from home before, which was a common situation for 19-year-old lads on our estate. Not many were going to university in those days, which meant that most stayed at home until they got married. For a 19-year-old lad in 1970, there were big issues to consider if you were moving out of the family home for the first time. Who was going to make your tea, or wash and iron shirts? With these issues to consider, it was obvious the West Yorkshire Constabulary was not the place for me. The decision was made. It was to be Leeds City, a 45-minute bus ride on the number 24 Halifax to Leeds bus via Cleckheaton, no problem. The entrance exam was at Leeds City Police HQ, Brotherton House. There must have been a dozen or more of us taking the exam on that Saturday morning. The test was comprised of general knowledge questions, and to this day I can still remember one of them. What do the initials EPNS stand for? I have no idea how I knew the answer to that one, but electroplate nickel silver got me at least 1 mark. This test was followed by some dictation, spelling, handwriting, and bad news for me, maths. With the exam finished, it was time to get the 24 bus back home. It was about 2 weeks later when the letter of acceptance arrived, signed by the Chief Constable, James Angus. That letter was the nearest I would ever get to meet the Chief. I heard from those who met him that he was a thoroughly likeable and down-to-earth kind of man. In 1974, when both Leeds and Bradford were amalgamated into the West Yorkshire Constabulary to form the new West Yorkshire Metropolitan Police, Mr. Angus was appointed as the new Deputy Chief Constable, behind the new Chief Constable, Ronald Gregory. I had to parade at the training department at Brotherton House for a week's induction, collect my uniform and be told all about the training school at Panelash in Harrogate. I can remember the first day I wore my new uniform at home as if it was yesterday. Grandma almost burst out crying and insisted in calling it a lovely suit. After 3 happy years, it was now time for me to give notice at Calder Valley. I was sad to leave because they had taught me so much. In June 1970, it was time to attend the No. 3 Area Police Training College at Panelash, Harrogate, my home and place of study for the next 13 weeks. I had never been to Harrogate before, but I knew it was a posh place, and I had never even heard of Panel Village. I was assigned to Class 1 with a mixed bag of other recruits, who were from as far away as Lincolnshire. The class sergeant was Jack Clapham, who was on secondment from Bradford City Police. We all slept in dormitories. The communal dining room was a huge place, with tables set out like an old Quap cafe. Meals were not that bad, and they had a bar as well, but even on the first day we were all told, "You don't have time to go out drinking, you will have far too much homework to do for the monthly exams." Having played in brass bands for 10 years, and having probably taken part in more marching processions than all the rest of the class put together, when it came to drill practice with the drill pig, it all came quite easy to me. However, one lad in Class 2 had a real problem. Firstly, his name was PC Tulip, and secondly, he could not march for the life in him. He was constantly out of step, and his arms went back and forward parallel to his legs, something which is almost impossible to do if you can actually march. The drill pig shouted and screamed at him all the time, "You lad, march properly. Left, right, left, right. What's your name?" Shouting back, as we had to when answering any of his questions, the lad replied, "PC 639 Tulip, Sergeant." "Tulip, lad? What sort of bloody name is that? See me after. I'll get you to march properly." And he did too. I think the sergeant scared him with the ultimate sanction of "march or you're out." In that first few weeks, the drill sergeant was certainly the most hated person at the centre by all of us. As we got into the second month, we all began to realise why he was constantly shouting and barking at us, and appreciated it in a strange way. Gradually, our marching improved as a group, and it would be fair to say, in my opinion, that our marching became pretty slick. On the rare occasions when we went to the bar, some of us even bought the sergeant a drink, and almost all of us thought of him being as one of the lads. The first 4 weeks soon came to an end, and the examination was imminent. It was something that I was not looking forward to. I hated exams at school, and even now, almost 50 years since I walked out of the school gates for the last time, I still have a dislike for them. One of the aspects I really dislike is when the exam is over and everyone is asking each other, "What did you get for number 6? Or what did you put for number 3? I always kept out of the way of these questions because I had invariably given different answers, which meant mine were usually wrong compared to the know-alls in the class. I sat up night after night swatting and trying to take it all in, which meant I never got to visit the bar. There were also those few classmates who seemed to be able to read the question and the right answer would pour out of them, as if someone had turned a tap on. Out of the whole of June 1970 intake, there was one lad in particular, Jeff Lum. I don't know how he did it. I saw very little evidence of him sitting up night after night swatting as I had to do. All the tutor had to do was ask him a question, and he would look at the tutor for a few moments, tilt his head to one side, close his eyes, and just as the tutor was about to repeat the question, he would give the right answer. It was as though he had a photographic memory, or he was searching for the right compartment in his brain that held the answer. He never got a question wrong, and even when he was asked to recite one of the police definitions that we had to learn from a little yellow book, he was word perfect every time. Once the first exam was over, I felt reasonably confident that I had actually done okay. However, Little did I know that as I walked out of the examination room, my future in the police force was hanging by a thread. 2 weeks after the exam, our sergeant sent for me to see him as a matter of urgency. I was outside, taking part in an exercise, when I got the message. "Walk, don't run," the instructor said. "And don't walk across the parade ground, walk round it." "OK, Sergeant," I replied, walking as fast as I could. "You wanted to see me urgently, Sergeant." "Yes, you have to see the Commandant as a matter of urgency. Go and put your best uniform on and your shiniest boots." "OK, Sergeant." "Why does he want to see me?" "I don't know. Just get on with it." I was back in what seemed to be just a few minutes. We stood outside the Commandant's office. "Watch the traffic lights," the sergeant said, pointing to a set just to the left of the door. "Red?" I was standing there with no idea about what was to happen. I couldn't think that I had done anything wrong to warrant having to see the senior officer in charge of the training centre. "Amber?" It is now getting a little bit scary. What can he want me for? I thought. "Green? Knock on the door and wait until you hear him tell you to come in," said the sergeant. "Come in!" It was barely audible through the big brown oak office door. "Go in, lad," the sergeant said. He reminded me, "Don't forget to salute." I opened the door and was met by a sea of faces, all sat round the big desk at the back of the room. The Commandant sat at the desk. "PC Helme reporting, sir," I said, and promptly saluted. He actually started by telling me never to salute an officer who is not wearing his headgear, particularly when he is sat down. I took a sideways look at the sergeant, who just smiled. "PC Helme, you have just completed the first examination of your 3-month course with us," the Commandant said. "Yes, sir." "Well, we have a problem." I was now beginning to be a bit worried. It was explained to me that after the examination, the results are sent in a letter to the training department of the police force of each recruit. If you have failed, a letter is then sent to the recruit, which tells them the result of the exam and tells them they are no longer suitable for further training. In other words, you're sacked. Our problem, PC Helme, is that whilst preparing your letter, the administration staff have sent your letter to Leeds with the wrong exam result. I was now really worried about what might be coming next, and for my future life as a police officer. My fears were soon justified when the Commandant said, "Leeds have been sent a result that indicates you have passed the exam, when in fact you failed." I then went through what I call a defining moment in my life. Here I am at the police training college, having wanted to be there from the age of 8, and one failed exam is going to send me on my way back home. I was devastated. What will everybody think back home? What will Grandma say? Were the questions buzzing in my head. The whole of my life flashed before me in what would have been a split second. Where does my future lie now? Do I burst into tears, faint, or just stare at the Commandant, thinking about packing my suitcase and wondering when the next train home is? Well, PC Helme, we have decided not to tell Leeds. We are giving you another chance. As far as they are concerned, you passed the exam. But, of course, you and I know you failed, so you must pass the next one and the last one. There will be no second chance. Now, do I smile, jump in the air, or still burst into tears? "Thank you, sir," I said. I must not salute this time, just stand smartly to attention and leave the room, followed closely by Sergeant Clapham. "Remember what he said. There are no second chances," said the sergeant. I believe it was him who spoke up for me, although I never found out if he had. I will always think to myself that he did. The second and third exams at panel came and went, and this time there were no nervous moments. The week before the passing out parade, which is held at the end of the course, I was sent for by the Chief Inspector, who was on secondment from the Leeds City Force. While Sergeant Clapham was our class tutor, the Chief Inspector was the overall senior officer in charge of the June 1970 intake, which was 3 classes. I could not believe that I was on the edge of being asked to leave again. So what did he want? "PC Helme, you will be leaving here at the end of next week. So here is the address in Leeds where you will live." I was puzzled by this, as I planned to live at home and catch the 24 bus to work from Halifax to Leeds via Cleckheaton. Live, sir? What do you mean? I intended to live at home. Oh, no, you're not. If you work in Leeds, you will live in Leeds. But I don't know Leeds, sir. Well, you soon will do. See me on Monday and let me know how you have got on. Before 1970, the only time I had been to Leeds was when I was a young teenager, in the days that I was a train spotter. I would visit the Neville Street railway sheds on my bicycle, a journey that seemed to take hours. The address I had been given meant nothing to me, or my mother, who offered to take me in her car. Addle, Alwoodley, and East Rigton are all very nice places, but the address I was given was in Harehills, not to be confused with Harewood. What a place it was in 1970. There was even a pub called the Ford Green. I only ever visited it once, but that was enough. It was a scary place, particularly if they found out you were a young policeman. Just to look at someone was almost taken as an invitation to fight. We arrived at the address, which was a 3-storey townhouse. It looked okay, I thought to myself, but I was not sure what my mother was thinking about it. I would soon find out, and it was not going to be too favourable. As I knocked on the door, memories of my grandmother came back to me, because in the 1950s she too would give accommodation, or digs, as they were called in those days, to young police officers, to new prison officers as well. Mother always said, "First impressions," and she was spot on, as usual. When the door was fully opened, we were faced with 2 ladies, who I had been told were sisters. I suppose the only way I could describe them would be to say that they even made Nora Batty from the television programme Last of the Summer Wine look good. We were invited in, and as they were showing us around the ground floor accommodation, they informed us that they had 6 children between them, all under the age of 10. Their parents came to stay every weekend, and on top of all that, I had to share with another policeman who worked at Chapeltown Police Station. For this, I was asked to pay £5 per week, which, out of a weekly pay of £18, was an arm and a leg back then. "Thank you," we both said, as we left the house. Nothing much was said in the car going home, but once we pulled up outside the front gate, my mother made not so much a comment, but more of a declaration. "Well, you're not stopping there." I didn't say anything, but just nodded. What do I tell the Chief Inspector on Monday? I thought as I walked back in. At breakfast on Monday morning, I was in and out of the dining room, trying my best to avoid seeing the Chief Inspector, but we came face to face as I walked out of the door. "P.C. Helme?" "Yes, sir." "Did you have a look at that address over the weekend?" "Yes, sir. My mother took me. I have a message from her. My lad is not stopping there." "Is that right? Well, tell her from me he is, and that's the end of it." Being new, green if you like, it was only a couple of weeks later that I realised I had been stitched up, and he knew that I wouldn't refuse, so my new home was to be just off Roundhay Road. As the week drew to a close and the rehearsals for the passing out parade were well under way, marching to recordings was not the same as the real thing. During one of the rehearsals, the Chief Inspector sent for me again. This time, the letter he gave me indicated I would be posted to Millgarth Street Police Station in the city centre on completion of my initial training. Mum and Dad travelled up for the passing out ceremony. The marching was immaculate. The drill pig had worked his usual miracle, and even his friend P.C. Tulip did not put a foot wrong. We marched to the sounds of the Leeds City Police Band, whom I would soon be joining. I said my farewells to the colleagues I had shared the last 3 months of my life with, and of course to all the tutors, especially Sergeant Clapham, who had done their best to turn me into a new police officer. It is now almost 45 years since the day that my dad drove me out of the gates for the last time. Since that day I had not been back to visit Panelash, nor have I seen any more than a couple of the recruits who I shared my life with all those years ago.